The LSU Tigers don't play, but the New Orleans Saints do, hosting the New York Giants this Sunday. To break it all down, we got Ross Jackson with Locked On Saints and writes for us right here at LouisianaSports.net. Ross, how are you today?
Hey, man, doing great. Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks so much for hopping on. Ross, when I look at this game, obviously you're playing a quarterback like Jaxson Dart. He has a little bit more of a running element than a guy like Russell Wilson would. And I understand they gave up 31 points last week to the Bills. I understand that Josh Allen was good in the fourth quarter. He's Josh Allen. He might be the best football player in the NFL. But for the most part, I thought you actually did an okay job against Josh Allen. I mean, what are your thoughts on maybe the improvements of this defense? Like, how can they slow down Jaxson Dart on the ground? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, look, I completely agree with you. I actually think the Saints did do a pretty good job up against Josh Allen until Josh Allen became Josh Allen in the fourth quarter, right? Does things that MVP-level players do. Jaxson Dart is not that player. Now, Jaxson Dart does have the ability to be mobile. We're also talking about a guy that got sacked 5 times last week, and as an offensive line that has to do a lot of improvising because of the amount of improvising that he does, and it's unlikely that that's going to necessarily, completely flip on its head in 1 week. And so I think the Saints defense, which, has, 11 sacks in the season so far, isn't really generating pressure at a consistent rate or a high rate. They're one of the lowest teams in pressure rating. But when they do get pressure, they're getting and making plays on the quarterback. And so I think that's going to be a big part of what the Saints are going to be looking to do. They're going to try to disguise, make him think with the ball in his hands, and see if they can get their guys there.
Look, I mean, Dart might be a rookie, but it looks like Quincy Riley might be set to start due to this Yadam injury. I mean, do you have any expectations for him in this game?
Yeah, I mean, look, Riley is somebody that I think they've been working more and more into the lineup since that Seattle Seahawks game. He was out there early on in that game, and then late when the Saints kind of, sat down all their starters once that game got out of hand late in the fourth quarter. And so during that time, he ended up making a play by punching a football out on a run play, which is not usually what you're used to seeing corners do. But that's the kind of player that Quincy Riley is. He's the kind of guy that gets involved in run defense. He's a good tackler. He wants to go out there and make plays on the football. And he's a ball hawk. I mean, that's the guy that had the most interceptions of any corner in the 2025 draft class. And so he's a player that, could help this New Orleans Saints team quite a bit if he can continue that trend going into the NFL. Saints didn't get their first interception until another rookie, Jonas Sanker, at safety, got it for them last week. And so I'm sure he'd love to add to the tally of takeaways, which he's already shown propensity to be able to do.
Look, Ross, one more on the defense before we switch over to the offensive side of the ball. I was looking at the injury report yesterday, and you're getting a little bit healthier. You're getting some guys back, but what is the deal with Chase Young? Because I feel like at the beginning of the year, they were like, oh, yeah, it's this calf thing. It doesn't seem to be anything serious. Like, we're in week 5, and it doesn't seem like he's any closer to playing now than he was week 1. What's the issue there?
Yeah, so when the injury first happened, Chase Young, gave a vehement disagreement with the idea that the injury would be long-term in the locker room. And then that kind of set the expectation that, this isn't a big deal. It won't take long. Kellen Moore said that it would be a week-to-week situation, but never really said that it wasn't going to be, what it was or wasn't going to be, I guess, timeline-wise. And so I think the biggest indication for what the expectation was, however, is that they didn't put him on injured reserve. And I know you're trying to save those designated to return spots, but typically when you use those designated to return spots, you probably want to use them on the guys that are the most important players to your team. And that was certainly the expectation of who Chase Young would be coming into the season. But now he's been off the field for 5 weeks. And I think that goes to show that there was obviously a different expectation versus the reality of whatever happened. So I don't know if it was a setback. I don't know if it was anything else. I thought that it was a very loud statement that the Saints ruled him out on Wednesday. Didn't even give him a chance to practice Thursday and Friday. They had already ruled him out by the end of Wednesday's practice. I thought that was pretty loud. So whether it was whatever they expected, it was actually worse, or whether it was a setback, or whether it was just a statement from the Saints by saying, we're just going to rule you out, I don't know. But in any case, this situation obviously has not gone the way, or at least I shouldn't say obviously, but appears very strongly to not have gone the direction that the Saints initially expected.
All right, Ross, switching over to the offensive side of things. Like, you're going up against the Giants team that has a pretty good defensive line, like for the most part. Now, you're without Cesar Ruiz, but you do get Trevor Penning back. How do you see this O-line holding up against this Giants front?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're going to have to be physical. They're going to have to be violent. And two of the most physical and violent players on that offensive line are going to be starting this week, and that's Trevor Penning as well as Torricelli Simpkins, the young rookie, who I spoke to the run game coordinator, TJ Paganetti, today, and I asked him about Torricelli Simpkins. I can't say the first thing on air that he said about him, but I can say that he called him one of the smartest players that he's ever met. And playing with a very physical play style, I think that's exactly what you need in a game like this. You're going to go up against some really, really good defensive linemen. I know Dexter Lawrence hasn't practiced all week with illness, but I don't think that matters. I think he'll be out there on Sunday, and he's a veteran that knows exactly what his role is and how to do it in this defense. Brian Burns is crafty. Kayvon Thibodeau is really good and athletic. And then you got a young guy in Abdul Carter, but obviously, of course, one of the top draft picks in this year's class and one of the top pass rushers expected to become over the course of his career. And so I think you're looking for those guys that have both the intelligence, the smarts, and the aggressive play style. And so it's going to be really interesting to see him stepping in place of Cesar Ruiz. And the thing's got a little bit of help today, too, with Dylan Ravens getting back to practice. So they might be able to have him active for an emergency situation should they need to where they don't have to fall back to some of the undrafted guys or some of the guys that were brought in late or anything like that. So I think it's going to have to be the biggest thing. They're going to have to set the tone up against a really, really good defensive line. And if they can do that, the rest of that Giants defense is vulnerable and susceptible to big plays. And so if the offensive line can hold up and maybe the run game creates some opportunities for that defensive line and maybe have to second guess and play honest, there should be some opportunities available for Spencer Rattler in the passing game as well.
So let's get into that. Like, the Saints attack, and you were just mentioning the running game, which, again, I thought they did a pretty good job against the Bills. But, the D-line that you were just talking about with Lawrence and those guys, a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because, they're going to stop the run. They're a good D-line. But you just mentioned all the pass rushers. I mean, Carter, Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. Do you think it's the running game approach similar to what it was against the Bills?
Yeah, I think so. Look, that for all the things that those players that we just talked about do very well in the pass game, they're not great in the run game. This is a 29th ranked rushing defense, and I think that they're actually either last or one of the two or three last, like bottom two or three, when it comes to yards per attempt, which obviously is always a little bit different based upon how many rushing attempts against the team, all those other things. And so there's a real opportunity there for a Saints team that really, really started to figure out its identity as a rushing offense last week up against the Buffalo Bills, to be able to build off of the success that they had against the 32nd ranked rushing defense, now going up against the 29th ranked rushing defense. So a real opportunity for them. If they can do that, it forces that New York Giants defensive line to play a little bit more honestly, so that they can't just pin their ears back on obvious passing downs and obvious passing situations to go after. And let's go after Spencer Rattler. It lets the Saints play a little bit more of that mixed down football where it's either pass or run. They have the options available to them both. And then that in turn helps to open up the passing game for the receivers and pass catchers as well.
Speaking of pass catchers, two guys that haven't played yet this year, but they seem to be getting a little bit healthier. I mean, what's the latest on Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we spoke with Taysom Hill today, and he was really brutally honest about sort of the process, and that 2025 was not a guaranteed situation for him.
Mm-hmm. And
so he was really, really, you could tell that it meant a lot to him to be back at practice throughout this week. He's listed as a quarterback now as opposed to a tight end, but we know that doesn't matter.
Right.
And so we'll see exactly how involved those guys are. I don't know if we'll see either one of them on Sunday. There's the recovery process in terms of being healthy enough to play football, but then there's the conditioning process. And then in this system in particular, or this situation in particular, it's a brand new offensive system to fit into. So is 3 practices enough to get those guys out there? We'll see. I mean, it's not like the Saints have played their third tight end too incredibly often throughout this season. So maybe there is kind of a package for Foster Moreau to fit into. Maybe there is some kind of short yardage package or short or red zone package for Taysom Hill to fit into. But when those guys do make their way back to the field, whether it's this week, I'd be way less surprised next week. Like next week feels very possible for them up against the Patriots. I'd be a little bit more surprised this week. But when those guys come in, I think it'll start with a really focused kind of role for both of them and then kind of grow out from there.
All right, Ross, last one before we get you out of here. Does Spencer Rattler get his first win as a starting quarterback?
Yes, I think this is the Saints' first best week and opportunity to get a win. There should be some things available to them in the passing game. They have not been able to complete but just 3 20-plus yard completions so far this season. I think they could potentially do that, replicate that number in this game alone. And if the run game is doing what it did with Alvin, Kamara, and Kendre Miller last week, I think that's going to help them out quite a bit. So I think the biggest thing is just going to be not letting Jaxson Dart and that Cam Scatterbo as well. Those 2 rookies create a run game against you where they're controlling the football. That's how the Giants beat the Chargers last week, even though it was kind of a subpar game otherwise. They controlled the clock. And so you've got to be able to counter that once you have the ball, New Orleans. And so I think that's something that they'll have to do. But if they can do that, I think this should be a win for them, and it should be Spencer Rattler's first win.
All right, you heard it here. Ross Jackson guaranteeing a win for the black and gold over there.
I'll say 95%, man. I'm very confident. I'm very confident about this game.
Well, there we go. Almost a guarantee for our guy, Ross Jackson. Again, Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints podcast, LouisianaSports.net. You can catch him on Twitter at Ross Jackson. Nola, Ross, thanks so much for hopping on with me today.
Of course, man. Thanks so much for having me. You take care. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. That there was Ross Jackson.
Hey, it's on. Thanks for watching Hunt on Saints. Before you leave, help us out a little bit. Hit that like button, leave your comments in the section below, and hit that subscribe button so you get all our content right here from Hunt on Saints. We'll see you next time.